Hello, it's Courtney, and I wanted to give you another perspective on this idea that culture eats strategy for breakfast because it ain't true. Okay, so a few years ago, the book on the screen was published. As you can see, it's called The No Asshole Rule, written by Robert Sutton. He's a professor at Stanford University, and we won't hold that against him. This book got pretty popular, or in the business community, known to some extent. And to me, I see a lot of overlap and corollary with this claim that culture eats strategy for breakfast. This idea that we need a nice, nurturing, polite culture is what we need to, manage our delicate sensibilities. And there's so much connection and overlap in my estimation. And in order to explain this, I'm going to use this example right here. Do you know who that person is? And the answer is probably no. You don't know. Let's be honest, right? I mean, he's from the 19th century, whatever. So if I told you his name was George McClellan, would that help? And again, the answer is no. You probably still don't know who he is. No problem. I'm going to tell you. Very simple. The first picture is in black and white because, like I said, he's from the 19th century. In color, sometimes it's useful because his jacket is blue. And he was, in fact, the general of the United States Army for, I believe, more time than any other general during the Civil War, the American Civil War. George McClellan. This is the guy who drove Abraham Lincoln bananas, bonkers, insane. Lincoln had many sleepless nights because of this guy. And why is that? Very simply because McClellan wouldn't fight. That's basically what Lincoln said. With the exception of perhaps Jesus Christ, Buddha, and Mohammed, there are few people, if anybody, who has had more written about them than good old Abraham Lincoln. The history is very clear. It's very straightforward. It's not difficult. It's available. It's hiding in plain sight. And there's a lot discussed about McClellan because McClellan, you could argue, had the best culture of any army general ever. His troops were in high spirits. They had great morale. He viewed his soldiers essentially as personal friends. He was very chummy with them, and they got along well. And for this very reason, he had an emotional inability, a barrier that kept him, that stopped him from sending his friends to their death, which is kind of understandable, right? It's completely understandable. Sending people to their death would kind of be an asshole move, right? Like, what a jerk. Now, you might automatically say, Courtney, you're using an extreme example. This is the military. That's different. I agree that it's an extreme example. And the reason we use it is because we don't have time to explain every combination. We're doing what's called science. This is literally a form of science right now. In science, one of the things we do is we develop a hypothesis. You could just call it a claim, but technically it's known as, called a hypothesis. And then we test it empirically, which means we test it against reality and the facts, evidence. And there's a concept that was literally made well known almost 100 years ago by Karl Popper called falsification. And what we do in science, we don't prove theories true, we disprove them. It's a one-way street. It's just the way it is. So the claim is culture eats strategy for breakfast. And if you can find me an exception to that, it disproves the hypothesis. Literally, that's how it works. And we're using an extreme example to simplify. Look, I've said it in the other video that Peter Drucker, who is the GOAT, claims to have written the first book on business strategy ever. It's on the screen now. It's called Managing for Results. And as you can see, it was published in 1964. Whether or not this was exactly the first book, I don't really care. For our purposes, it's immaterial. What matters is that, as Drucker claims, prior to the 1960s or around this time, strategy was only used as a word in military language, in military discussions. Nowadays, we do talk about business strategy some 60 plus years later, whatever. But traditionally, strategy was reserved just for military. So it's not crazy or out of bounds to use the military as an example. And McClellan had a very high morale amongst his troops. The only problem is, had McClellan remained the general of the United States Army during the Civil War, most certainly the United States would have broken into two different countries. That's pretty clear. And you'd be hard pressed to make a case that slavery was a good thing, that we should still have slavery. Pretty, that's a clearly on its face absurd claim. So it's important that we won that war. And what Lincoln had to do, and he tried various generals, he eventually came to this guy. Do you know who that is? And there's a good chance you do recognize this person, if not from the story I'm telling you, perhaps from his actual image. Who is that on the screen? That is, of course, if I told you his name, it might help. His name's U.S. Grant. That's what they called him back then. They called him U.S. Grant. More traditionally, or nowadays, people refer to him as Ulysses S. Grant, which is kind of silly to include his middle initial because how many Ulysses Grants do you know? But I digress. Anyways, that's Ulysses S. Grant. And if you wanted to answer the question, gun to your head, what single Army general deserves the most credit for winning the Civil War, it would clearly be Ulysses Grant. He would fight. He's a fighter. There were others. Obviously, Sherman led the army from Atlanta to the sea. These stories are very clear. But over leading it all was Grant. And he said, we got to fight. He was also a brilliant strategist. That helps as well. He had a great strategic vision. And I'm pausing to let you dwell on that for a second. Culture eats strategy for breakfast? Then why would McClellan have lost the war and was clearly losing the war with a great culture, high troop morale, great vibes and feelings amongst the soldiers, but they were losing? And it took a guy who was arguably an asshole. I mean, a lot of people say that Grant was an alcoholic, and whether or not I don't care about the label. He was a heavy drinker. People could say he was an asshole. He sent plenty of people to their death, which is kind of an asshole move. And yet he won because the strategy was right. Culture does not eat strategy for breakfast. It's silly. Now, back to Bob Sutton, because I understand that, you know, the United States pretty clearly has an excessively masculine culture. There's not much debate there. That's not a controversial claim. We've got the John Wayne cowboy, Lone Ranger, yeehaw culture here in the United States, don't we? And it's excessively masculine. What am I saying? Yes, we need to bring in more feminine energy. So for that reason, and you know, it's not about gender, it's about feminine and masculine energies. They're basically gender roles within culture. But because the culture is excessively masculine, correcting for that, I have no problem with Professor Sutton correcting for it. Well, I only have a little problem with saying the no asshole rule. It's kind of like saying patience is a virtue. The reason we say that is because people are excessively impatient. So since there's a clear asymmetry, people are leaning in one direction too far, we say things like patience is a virtue to correct for that imbalance. But it's not totally true. Sometimes patience is a vice in the form of procrastination. What's the difference between patience and procrastination? It's not obvious. We're not going to talk about it now because that's a different conversation. But the reason patience is a virtue has become a known saying, a known quote, a known meme, is because people are excessively impatient. The reason you could write a book like this saying the no asshole rule is the same idea. The culture is excessively masculine. And I'm not saying men are assholes. No, of course not. Again, it has nothing to do per se with gender. It just has to do with this energy. And yes, a lot of times we do allow people to be assholes. Steve Jobs being kind of the quintessential one, but others as well, not just him. Larry Ellison has a reputation as well, but let's say Steve Jobs. Don't sue me, Ellison. I can say what I want. um, Steve Jobs was known to be an asshole. Well, okay, now what? Is that the end of the world? I do support a combination. We need a combination of both the masculine and the feminine energy. I know this is complex, but not too much. You can handle this. Let me give you an example. In his second inaugural address, Lincoln ended with these words on the screen: with malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Lincoln is known to have been amazing, a master with words. But look at the beauty of this run on sentence. It's like a paragraph, right? But it's actually a run on sentence, maybe. Well, it's not a problem. In this single paragraph, you see both masculine and feminine. Lincoln was kind of was Lincoln was known for being very nice. He was shy almost to the point of having an inferiority complex at times, but he could also be rough, right? He went crazy with McClellan. He was like, fight, you have to fight, because he was fighting for a bigger challenge. As he said in the Gettysburg Address, it is rather for us here to be dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government by the people, of the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. And I'm not going to redo this. I screwed up. Oh well, I said them backwards. That government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. That was the initial mission of the Civil War, was to preserve the Union. Now, ultimately, we do know that the thing that was fracturing the Union was slavery. But Lincoln's real mission was to preserve the Union. In fact, in the beginning, he said if he could preserve the Union without extinguishing slavery, he would do it, which that's a difficult moral position to be in also. Slavery is clearly wrong. But the point of what I'm saying is, in this paragraph, you see both the masculine and the feminine. We're going to fight, which is more of a masculine energy. And people are going to die. It is what it is. But at the same time, he's obviously talking about malice towards none, charity for all. He talks about caring. The word care is literally right there in front of your eyes. So Lincoln was this masterful, excellent combination of both the masculine and the feminine energies, which is a good thing. Another person who does it quite well is this person right here. I'm also a big fan of this person. Do you know who that is? Perhaps not. I'll tell you. That is Brene Brown. She is also a professor like Robert Sutton. She is at the University of Houston. I believe she splits her time with UT Austin also, but whatever. I think she got her graduate degree at University of Houston, and she also teaches there. So we'll just shout out to the Cougars, I believe they are. I could be wrong. Don't hold it against me. University of Houston. And she's on a book tour to sell her book, Dare to Lead, some years ago. And in those sorts of conversations, very often the interviewer will ask for the one thing. What's the one thing? If you were to leave our audience with one thing, what would it be, right? This is literally CBS This Morning, right? Like a pretty widely viewed show. And understandably, you're going to see Gayle King ask her, what's the one thing? Which, there's never really one thing, but Professor Brown knows her stuff very well. By the way, a little side note, Professor Brown, holla at your boy. Like, I'm a huge fan, and what you're doing through your work is proving Peter Drucker right, but that's a different conversation. Nonetheless, she does get asked, what's the one thing? And because Professor Brown knows her stuff, she's able to give an answer, and listen to the answer. Here it is.
cover to cover on a flight. One behavior change that you think all leaders.
I think I just screwed that up. I didn't have it set up on this stupid. I'm recording this on Zoom, whatever. So now let's restart because I didn't have it optimized for video. Come on, Zoom, figure it out. Here we go. Restart.
You hope that people that read this book, it will result in one behavior change for leaders, that they should read it cover to cover on a flight. One behavior change that you think all leaders need is what?
It's going to be simple. Clear is kind, unclear is unkind. Stop avoiding the tough conversations because you think you're being polite or kind to people. That's not kind.
The breath of fresh air.
Preach, preach, sister, preach.
Clear is kind, unclear is unkind. Stop avoiding having the hard conversations because you think you're being polite. Right? Nora O'Donnell's over there pounding the table. Preach, preach. We know this is true. We know that sometimes you kind of have to be an asshole. Look, in cultures, they often, the name of this video is probably going to be called Culture Eats Assholes for Breakfast. Because that's what cultures often do. We talk about the squeaky wheel, right? What is the squeaky wheel? They're annoying. Oh, get rid of that squeaky wheel. They're an asshole. They're annoying. We talk about don't rock the boat, right? Give me a break. What more colloquial, common phrase clearly says culture eats assholes for breakfast than don't rock the boat? That is a clear, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying that it should be this way, but this is how cultures do. They get set in their ways and their systems. And a lot of times it is excessively focused on being polite or nice. Don't, hey, don't rock the boat. Don't rock the boat, man. What's wrong with you? So this book should actually be titled The Seldom Asshole Rule. That's what it should be titled, to be more accurate. I agree. I would agree if this was the title of the book, The Seldom Asshole Rule. Generally, you don't want to be, most of the time, you want to be kind, nurturing, sure. Right? Magnanimous, whatever these crazy words, big words. I don't care about the big words. Mostly leaders are teachers. Yes, I agree with that. But you have to be able to go there. Lincoln sent people to their death. He cried over it, but he still sent them. Now, again, I realize the military is an extreme example, but it clearly disproves the claim that culture eats strategy for breakfast. What is the right balance? How often should you be an asshole? Well, I'm going to be sort of an asshole right now and say, quit asking for recipes. I can't give you an exact recipe. That's part of leadership development. This is why it takes time. And you should join me in particular. Join us. Follow me. I'll show you. It takes time to get the different combinations and permutations to embody this skill set. Doesn't take forever, but it takes a little bit of time. There is no exact recipe. What I'm telling you is the percentage of the time that you're an asshole should not be a majority, but it also shouldn't be zero. Now, I realize if Professor Sutton heard this, he'd probably laugh and be like, oh, Courtney, knock it off. You know, we had to sell books, right? The no asshole rule will sell more books. First of all, it's not a rule, right? They always put, not always, but often put the word rule in there. Oh, rule, really? Like, I'm a fan of Malcolm Gladwell. I like Malcolm Gladwell, but he's the one who made this thing called so-called 10,000 hour rule, which you may have heard of before. And it's bullshit. It's not true. It's not a rule. So, sorry, not sorry. But when you say it's a rule, it gives that certainty that people like, immature, underdeveloped people, and it sells things. You know, there's a guy named Marshall McLuhan. You don't need to know that name, but you might know his most famous quote. You may have heard this before, maybe, maybe not. But the quote says, it goes like this: the medium is the message. Have you ever heard that before? It gets thrown around quite a bit. The medium is the message. And it's a weird thing, you know what I mean? It's quite esoteric, almost like metacognition or whatever the hell it's called. Like it's a bit, what's the word? It is like metaphysical. What does that even mean? It's not obvious. It's not clear cut, but here's a good example. The medium is the message. This is a book, obviously. And to sell books, a lot of times the stuff they put on the cover is outrageous, hilarious. And I love you, Professor Sutton. I don't, if for no other reason than your middle initial is I. That's pretty unique. It's kind of cool. What is your middle name? Indica? I don't know. It's kind of cool. Grabs your attention, at least did to me. I've read multiple of his books. I understand Professor Sutton. I just disagree with this, but I get that the medium is the message. When you're trying to sell books, you call it the no asshole rule because the seldom asshole rule is too complicated, right? Like people want simple and clear if they're going to fork over the money. Not everybody. The people that are kind of dreamers and wishful thinkers. Look, I hate to break it to you, but Professor Sutton has no financial incentive in your outcomes. He wants you to buy the book. I'm not saying he's some dirty capitalist or whatever. He's literally a professor. Like, I'm not saying that makes him noble either, but I'm not impugning his integrity at all. I'm simply saying that the medium is the message. So many times books get a little bit twisted and a little bit bullshitty, right? It's funny that the no asshole rule has so much bullshit because where does the bullshit come from? An asshole. So I have to put that in your pipe or whatever and figure it out. But this prohibition against being an asshole is childish. It's juvenile. It's silly. I'm a nice person, believe it or not, most of the time. But, the truth hurts. Sometimes you have to speak the truth, right? Lizzo said the truth hurts. We all know that, right? And she got in trouble or canceled too for whatever. Who knows? Because nobody's perfect. And I'm not perfect, but I am a nurturing, caring person. And I have a lot of feminine energy. And that's not just because I have a girl's name. It's because I follow the truth. I am devoted to the truth. Bible says the truth will set you free. I agree. Truth is a necessary condition of freedom, and all humans yearn for freedom. It seems pretty clear, overwhelmingly clear. So what's the right balance of asshole versus kind? I can't give it to you, but what we do know is what Professor Brown said. Clear is kind, unclear is unkind. But for our purposes here right now, more important is culture does not eat strategy for breakfast. Some super nice culture. You can have the McClellan culture. We could call this training, Don't Be George McClellan. I think I'll put that in the description. Don't be George McClellan. Sure, you're nice and you're kind, but you're a failure. And it's not all about winning and losing. That's not about that. It's about serving the mission. There's so much talk about serving servant leadership, and it gets bastardized as well. So much bullshit surrounding that. Be a servant leader. Oh my God, I'm so humble. Oh my God. It doesn't mean wash people's feet. We know Jesus did that. We know that's a real story, but that's not what it's meant to say. I am a servant leader and I don't serve people. I serve the mission, right? You do what the mission calls for. And right now in the United States, we are fractured. Some people, get all crazy and say we're about as fractured as the Civil War, and that's probably not true, but we're in that direction. And it's pretty clear that what we need is the solution is not more masculine energy. That's what got us into this problem. And it's not, I don't have a dog in the fight per se. I'm just following the truth. If we're going to go back to the John Wayne cowboy stuff, we don't live John Wayne cowboy. You're on the internet right now listening to this. You probably sit at your desk most of the day. You're a knowledge worker. You're not a cowboy. You couldn't start a fire with a stick if you had to. Neither could I, of course. Who cares? Doesn't make me less of a man. And by the way, my goal is not to be a man. It's to be a man. The truth will set you free. You yearn for freedom. So if you want to live by a rule, make it the seldom asshole rule. But don't get it twisted. Culture does not eat strategy for breakfast. That's baby beginner bullshit.